Going through digitalized compute settings and travel calculation line visualization of system through inventory graph set lines, we have to really start identifying our system off the computer framing, right? Modifications, consoles, line stream interference, not just the navigation settings and travel, but the team is into hard calculation center interference. The direct location system has to really identify what's above and what's below. But the eagle line communication line is no longer separate. It's bounds communication streamlines. That puts everything in together location. Now these are dividers. Use the dividers instead of location travel lines. This opens all signals and modifications, right? So welcome back, everyone. All right, in position locations, changing atmosphere line screens are all direct signals instead of locations. So this is about understanding digitalized computation. The computation settings in travel, we have to understand how to identify placebos and what is a placebo cortex line calculating setting. Endorphins are basically based on communication to make you happy, right? Well, you have to understand the truncated communication of its move because the gleaming cubes in this application cubical line screen interference is coming into tritherium. Now, the tritherium line interference has a trothel calculation setting and position location of your throat settings in travel. Direct lines of communication lines that operates in several location system of travel calculations. Direct lines of panels in position location. Split the anomalies in one track location, right? Line position of track location. Okay? Now, center calculation lines, all levels. Okay? Now, astral projections and travel calculations and directions. Film projectors, a two-track line calculation setting. Calculate high interference. Umbrella over cross-line screen set location. Okay? Very complicated stuff. You are in the interline communication of the dorm, setting calculation setting to travels. Dome set location is setting. Okay, so as you come in the placebo cortex line, the stream line indicates positions of overpower of generation screen sets. Now, direct line calculation setting, this is where the flywheel and changes its direct signal and set location of travel settings and travel. Now, the communication line interference sets lines of communication. Electric lights, 3 lines of communication centers, 4 track lines and 5 calculation setting, and 6 position location 7/8. Setting that communication lines at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of foundation graph calculations. Brings position of the sun and the moon. Okay. And set location. Okay. Now, getting direct line calculation X2000 is above line signal. Sets lines travel calculation line inside position. Outline track lines, half pipe and position to ground setting and travel communications. Now, direct lines and position location, we come into the archetypes. Center lines of communication, center communication. All right, complicated stuff, right? Sets lines of astral projections and astral travel calculations. Now, the placebo cortex lines has this cerebral cortex setting. Directs lines of communications into green lines, into the dimensional door screens. Sets lines of communication of 2 travels, in position of 3 set location, high settings, and all position. And you see the dimensional door screens? All right. Sets line security and 3-line communication. Okay. So you add the line calculation setting and position of travel. Security measures, points, lines, track. Okay, in 3 travel line position locations of operation. 4 lines of divisions into 5 set locations. Okay. Crosses line settings. Okay, in a 45-degree angle. Now this digitalized the compute system of travel calculations. Not my question. All right, so understanding how to get into travel communication is really understand not just the formulas of equation, but understand how to get into the digital computation. Setting communication lines. Let's start with the 1-line rotation, right? There's a 1-track location, right? Setting a calculation what's above and what's below. See the indications? All right. Now it's the equal line in position, right? So you concentrate communication on this setting and I'll travel, okay? Directs line calculation setting to arrow points in track locations and high setting in position of pi. You split it in 3 anomalies, okay? Setting tractors communication at 3-point centers, okay, at 3 clockings, okay? Now that's just the 1. This is how 1 travels. So set up the argument image, puts position locations to your cortex lines of your cerebral. 1 line set line connections, 1 equals lines of 0, 1 in track locations. In the line calculations of 1 equals lines of 0. Okay, 0, 1. Okay, so the compute line interference comes into 0 track locations into position. 1 comes in setting, and we get in position travel. 0, 1, 1, 0. And that's just the 1 compute system of 1 line setting. And the 3 track lines are 3 compute centers in 3 o'clock locations. Okay, so really understand how to come in this signal. Okay, center communication 0 ground. Okay, coming into the ground settings into 0 gravity again, right? So all lines of communication cross the screen, right? Sets position locations in 3 track line connections, 0, 0 of operation. Very complicated. Now the center communication line interference, high position near Merkaba, inline calculation of center calculations, so point centers, direct calculations of platforms, 2 platforms and 3 track locations. Okay, direct lines of communication line center, the 1 line signals, sets line, the 10 line communication sets platforms and position locations in the 5 track location centers. It's applications all through 1. This is what you can do through 1. Just 1, number 1. So I'm showing you exactly what's above and what's below and how you come into 0, 1 in track location. Remember I showed you line calculation setting, how you set up lines of 0, 1 track lines? Well, it's all about understanding the multiple levels on communication setting travels, 1, 1, 1 line, 0, but there's always a space in between the set locations. Okay, now it's getting complicated, right? So 1 creates its image, which is argument. Stands on 4 track line calculation setting position of portals of communication. Now, center calculation line interference sets lines of communications and direct signals in panels, in sonar, in communication of center calculation. Very complicated stuff, all through 1 track location. Okay? But I'm just showing you what the 0s and 1s do through traction. Okay? Not through 2, not through 3, not through 4, not through 5, only 0 and position of 1, right? So 1 in track location, what's above is what's below, but it's the equal line communication of platform. Sets lines of communication. So this is you, okay, traveling across line, okay? So your platforms are already in 24, 48, 72, and 144 in set locations, right? So it's knowing exactly how to go through the cerebral cortex lines of design and position travel calculations. Okay, very complicated stuff, right? So the center communication line interference sets lines in the higher self, so that's line communication setting the travel, points its system locations and position line calculates setting the set location. Okay, directing lines of communications. Center lines into the center communications. Down across the screen goes right into the center line of travel and mechanism, a high force line setting. Black holes in track locations, light web, dark web, and set location and setting. Inside location, right? So it goes inside and then it goes in position outside in track locations. Out through equation, out through measure, out through its thought, out through its image, into its next destination. Hoo-ah! Mega multipass. And that's just through the higher self. All right. So what is the higher self and the correlations of light conditions of 1 lines of 0, 1, 1, 0 in position locations setting of 10? Schumann resonance. And that's just a 1 frame set location of travel. I'm showing you what you can do when you understand how to use the track location settings in position to your inventories and set locations. Okay, you need a platform to cross location. Okay, mega multipass. All right, so directing communication of panels is time setting. Now, in time setting is getting the graph calculations, 4 graph calculation strings. All right, direct calculation lines, 0 travel. That's point centers and high set locations. Right, so that's indicated below. That's indicated above. That's indicated mediation, and that's indicated positions above. Right, sets position locations. All right, platform communication, platform communication, platform communication, platform communications. Okay, so this is about understanding what a 0 does in travel calculating line system, and then you stand on the top because the 0 gravity lines is a 24, sets position of 48, sets position of 72, and sets position location of 144, tracks this location of platform. So you're able to go in position and jump cross screen settings. Okay, this is where it comes into high calculation and to allocated line screens as application of time setting. In set locations, how you can vortex and jump screen, time jump, vortex jump, set location of platforms, all through 0 correlations in a 4-track line setting. 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings in travel. Hoo-ah. Okay. Now let's just do a 24 sequence. Now in that line calculating line centers of seconds, change position location of minutes, sets lines of communication of hours. Now the hours change line communication of 0, 0 operation in bracket communication of center. Direct lines of communication setting this program. Very complicated stuff, isn't it? All right, so understanding what you're doing is all formation, okay, through 1-track line connections. That is just 1 track of what it can create through a higher self into its earth perception, okay? Know exactly how to create a story frame in all levels of digital computation, all through platforms. On a 24 signal, 48 way framing, 72 computer framing, and 144 crystal grid. Crystal grid, crossing streamline centers of 4-track location of 4 line settings of 0 calculation. Okay, going beyond. So when you're seeing the Schumann resonance, this is what you're seeing up close. Okay, your Schumann resonance sees this. This is what your Schumann resonance is. So it's location line centers. 4 graphs set location of screens. Let's go into modification settings, attractions. Okay, let's go to line centers. Point system attract. Okay, look at this. In position locations, all right? We got that setting, right? Okay, so let's go into this set location. Okay, let's go into this set locations. Let's start with that, okay? Then let's go in line calculation setting. Let's wave it in set location. Traffic calculation line system. Remember, this is all levels of compute line screens. Same position of panels and position of traffic calculations. All right? Then you come into line calculating. Let's get into the alpha line, delta, and theta waves in communication setting and travel calculations, right? Then you get into modification screen lines, lacing line communications, 3 lines of track, 4 lines of measure, and 5 lines of provision in set locations. Okay? Schumann resonance. But when you go beyond, you're going through the platform. So 24, 48, 72, and 144. Once you reach 144, you're at 0 in position of 24 in set locations. Faster triangulation. Setting lines of 0 in position of 48. Set lines of 0 in position of 72 computer framing. Sets lines of 0 into position location of 144 track location setting. Now this bounces your string lines in high positions calculation, putting all levels of modification lines in position. Schumann resonance. All through your higher self. So we start with the higher self first. You don't start with your avatar, okay? Because your avatar is in space line. The direct location is equal line communication and mediation. Setting travel calculating lines of point systems, all calculated modified, and all direct signal location system and travel. This is just the higher self through information. Through its placebo of its design of its image. So when you go back, and you bring it in, what are you seeing in track lines? You're seeing nothing but structure of design. Okay? It's amazing how you can see outside, right? Right? It's amazing how you can't see outside. It all depends on the day site locations, what it is through structure of this design. Anything with the calculated line inference and structure location system is as placebo cortex lines of digitalized communication. But understand how to travel through 1 line center in position of higher self in a 4-platform communication setting of 0, 1, and 1, 0 communication of 10 line screens to set location system, puts everything in modification to send a calculation. Okay? Yes, it's very cool. So I really want you guys to understand that. So now you're starting with your higher self calculation line inference and your 0, 1 tractions. Okay? This is all about understanding how to use your matrix streams and direct signals. Where they come in modification center and travel. Okay, sets position, but there's got to be space in between so it can travel, right? So it can travel, right? Because the inventory is this line communication. It's always on a 45, always on a 45, always on a 45. So the 0s and 1s are in an inventory, coming in track location, right? Coming in inventory track location, coming in inventory through pi. Okay, once it comes in calculation, it comes in chronological order. Now, the center calculated line inference, let's say you get an anxiety string line in positions and you have 1 line center locations, you're at a box line. There's a box line that's not supposed to be there, but because you added through a 4 equation. So that's a 4-point centers in position location of molecule design. That's not good. That adds lines 4 over 3. So that's 4 equals lines of 3. Sets lines that calculates lines of 7 in traction. Now, in that direct signal and position location line system, you have to take that box out because everything in chronological order will separate its set location of setting and position to its operation surface, and triangulation repositions its placebo cortex of its design, and separation in position locations, modification line centers, and come to interference location of faults in communication lines and misinterpretation. Done by equation, right? That's why you have to keep in order. And so the convergence setting is really understand how to modify all this in traction. Okay, so that's what we're starting with right now, because your set lines and your communication lines is zeros and ones through the higher self. Okay, I'm just showing you exactly how powerful it is to know exactly how to use this in correlations of panels. How you come into line calculation setting position of 1, 1, 1. That's a 4 bracket communication. Now, equals lines position location of 4 settings. Okay, sets lines of 0. 0 calculate E lines. That's high position location. That's so ozone calculation into biosphere and set locations, right? This is an algorithm. Okay, setting lines of 1 line in position locations into all levels. Let's equal line the communication of 2, 2, and 3 track line connections in position of all program. Okay, 3 center line communication 2, 2, 2. 0 operation, 0 operation, 0 operation. 2 track lines. Connections of 1 line, equal line high calculation of 2 track lines, 2 over 3, 3 over 5, and 5 line position of 7 in 7 location. That's an algorithm. That is an image. That is a photo at all position locations to instruction. Okay, that's my equation. All right, so now you understand how to use the zeros and ones, right? A little basic understanding through higher self. Just the higher self, not the avatar, not the sim. This is all through your earth perceptions of 1 line signal and set locations. Okay, all right. So once you get into that communication, it gets more interesting now. Because once the 1 understands the above and its below, it can change its zeros and ones in track location system and all of the levels of calculation. Sets lines communication of 0, 1. It can do anything it wants because it understands its chronological order. But the equal line communication needs its platforms and set location. Okay, you know why it needs its platforms? So it can get into higher levels of modulations and communication settings. All of those into your compute line rotation into your test rig of its design. Okay, so it needs its platforms in center calculations. Okay, so it jumps in. Okay, screens cross line settings and high position its operation. There it is in set location, traveling, right? So in that line calculation setting, we take the zeros and ones and ones and zeros and zeros and ones in track location. And then we take the below centers of 0, 1, 1 in track location and position locations, 0, 1, 1 in position. So in that calculation line interference comes in a clock line setting in its position of infinity 8 that sets its communication to its center line in above line and below line communication setting, platforms of communication of travels into its placebo of its cortex design of its set location of its dimensional screen set location. Very complicated stuff, right? So now you understand how to use the zeros and ones in traction, how important it is to have that 24, 48, 72, and 144. You put that all together through seconds, minutes, and hours, especially if you guys are in billion line seconds high calculation. If you get 1 billion, okay, equal lines of a box frame, equal line position of triangulation, and triangulation at a box location. Okay, very complicated stuff. So that's a triangulation at read-line centers at 3 force locations. Setting track lines and box line and center line communications molecule design line in a cubical string setting in position of its operation location system into a black hole set location. Okay, remember, you create all this. So the balance communication line centers, right? We have a beta wave, low gravity line stream. Then we change the balance line communications to the beta equals lines of theta, change communications in theta communication of box line rotation surface. Sets lines at 2 waving lines, 3 waving line rotation centers. Travel calculation offline communication center and travel. Position cross line streamline position location of 4 settings in time position. Crosses calculations, box line, in center calculations, a point center. Okay, let's say location centers of travel. Let's go through security measures. All right, so I'm showing you the theta communication of box line in all of the time frame. In track location of point centers and position. Okay, see the box frames, location lines, how you go through beta wave and position locations right away to theta box, center lines back and balance, position, equalize, communication setting, what's above and what's below, center line communications. Now, in direct line calculation setting, in that track lines, you can add zeros and ones. We're only going to stick with zeros and ones because there's no point going into a graph line, a 12 line, if you don't understand your zeros and ones in traction. So back in communications, we go into 0 ones. I'm just showing you how to go through the graph calculations. Let's go through 3, 4, 5 settings. Okay, setting track lines, set lines of 0 in position of 1. Okay. Okay, so we have 0, 0, 2 operation service locations, and 2 line communication setting to travel. Sets position location lines, coordinates, calculation lines in position of Jupiter. Jupiter line calculation lines in Neptune. Neptune line communication setting in position of point centers and 3 track line connections, a point line connection, a clock line interference, and travel. Okay, directing lines of communications, right? Then we go through the line calculation setting. You have to start off with there's our beta wave, change the beta to alpha, delta, let's go to omega, back to alpha and set location. Okay, there's a graphic calculation line interference, Schumann resonance, right? But this is just the higher self. This is just information on the higher self, not the avatar, not the sim. So in that track line calculation high interference, you know the center communication, right? You understand your flywheel or what it's doing through travel calculation, right? But what you do have to understand and is how to use the zeros and ones of travel. Okay, this is all inside you through a graphical screen. Setting lines of communication setting is your crop circle. So you've already reached the 024 to 0144. Sets lines of communication center and bounce communication center to communication. All right. So modification line screens, sets lines of calculation, film strips, and 3 calculation streamlines, indirect signal and modification. Okay. Then we take the 45-degree angle and a 3-track location. Brings the sun, brings in the moon in, but on a certain line of communication, of travel lines and position of its operation. Okay, very complicated stuff, guys. This is just through the higher self of 0-1 track location. So I really want you to understand what you guys are coming into is you're creating a placebo. And that placebo is creating this cortex of its mystical line screen. This comes into metric location settings of travel. So getting into that position location is 1 graph center, 2 graph line centers, the 3 track locations, right? Sets lines in a 45 cross line downstream. Sets lines and line connection high centers. Direct calculation lines above the line signal and set location. So you're working into the center of communication of center calculations of space in between. So directing line communication lines, position location, Mother Earth, and Father Space. Okay, so you got the Fibonacci line swirl, sets lines of 0, sets travel communication of 0, sets lines of 0, sets lines of 0, flux capacitor. Compressors, line position of atmospheres, changes communication centers of travel. Inside location, high position of its operation. Okay, now directing line communication line centers, we cross the stream, right? Crosses line centers. See it? Sets lines of communication to its, you guessed it, it's bulb. Okay, it's light bulb. And set location of travel. Now exactly what's in a compressor is position location of overpower, generates a screen line interference in your position location system, and travel calculations of point centers of travel calculation. All right. So there's all ways of doing this, all through zeros and 1 track line connections through its image. So what the placebo does is it sets the cortex of its design, of its structure. Now this is where it comes into 2 panels communication, 1 graph calculation, 1 graph line setting. Okay, 1 graph line, 1, 2, 3 platforms and calculations, right? 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, right? So 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, right? But it's 0 ones. Where's the 0, 1? It's already there in traction, right? Because the 0, 1 is here. 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 The 0, 1 is here because I've already traveled through its set location on the other side connections. So multiple level line interference, the center correlation setting position has to have its past, present, and its future of zeros and ones, the correlation setting the traction. It's got to have a direct signal in position of platforms. It needs the platform because it equalizes the communication of what's above, and it equalizes the communication of what's below in set location. So you have to understand the equal line communication is the platforms that you cross into its dimension of its pi and 3 calculation setting and set location. Okay, so you understand why it's so important to understand how you come into 24, 48, 72, and 144. And then once you get into that, you go into 024, you went faster and faster and faster. So you're creating higher levels of dimensions to high position travel calculations, higher levels of multiple levels, dimensional levels, intergalactic levels, interdimensional line and position interface levels, communication line interception location system, position location operation levels, high position location cortex communication levels, zero line communication lines, one line and position location, high experience travel levels. It's all direct application of sitting. But you have to understand the balance. So the flywheel has to be in the center in all track location of setting, position of its operation. Okay. So once it gets into its 144, it's creating its dimensional, and it goes through line calculation. It travels, right? So that's what you're creating, right? And that's positions levels of 0 and 1 track locations. So in that line centers, you got 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, and 1 over here. Okay. Now, if you're adding position of decimal points, you have to know exactly where they're going in track lines. So we add point line centers, travel position of point line 1. Okay. Sets position locations of pi in line calculation, splits anomalies in 3 track line connections. Sets position of vortex stream into 150,000 line of communication. Teleportation unit, isn't it? Just add the ground settings, operation surface, travel position location line system, and track lines in 0 calculation. Okay, platforms of communications. It's already set up. So really understand that you have an XT1000 and 2 track line connections, right? Direct lines of signals, modification system, travel lines of 0, 1, and track location, right? Sets lines of 0 and position locations in 1 track and point line track lines in 3 set locations, right? So we plot it to the line centers and picks it up and position travel lines in 3 set locations. Direct calculation of 0, 1s, position line calculations in 3 track locations, right? So we have the center calculation of the grounds, okay, which is again, the flywheel, okay? So what you have to understand is to keep the balance of stream into your placebo cortex that was designed and position, okay? Once you understand that, then you can add higher levels of platforms of communication. Sets lines of communication as center grounds into, you guessed it, its scales of balance in its dimensional screen lines of pi in its placebo cortex of its image of its design line and the structure of calculation of another universe line conditions of planetary surface locations of a dimensional door setting. Okay? So there's a lot of communication centers and locations. So you guys have 3 flywheels. You don't just have the center calculations. You need one for the ground, you need one for the power, and you need one for the atmosphere. Okay? Very powerful when you're coming into these applications. All through 0s and 1s subtraction. Just 0s and 1s. That's it. I'm just showing you exactly what you can do through your higher self. Because the team line center, you guys are out of the baby child. You're in the teenager line screen now. So understanding the line connection high interference and position track line is going backwards and then going forwards and then going backwards and then going forwards again. 2 track line high positional calculations. So in line communication setting, if 0 travels, you have to really understand how to identify if you go into higher levels of setting. Okay. So you got 0 ground, that's an alpha line. Okay. You got a 2 line, that's a delta line in communication. The graph is going higher, right? So it's like a graph that goes higher and higher and higher. That's all it is, right? So 0 grounds, 1 ground, 2 ground, 3 grounds. Set position at all levels, low frequency, mediation frequency, okay? And you got a high frequency in set locations, okay? So that's what happens, right? 0s and 1s stay in track location, but if you change your motion line in your frequency panel, it changes in position numbers. You're indicating line calculating settings. So you have to really control your mechanism line connections of overpower, overcharge, over mechanism, over setting. The compute system of the digitalized communication interference of frame position of travel calculation is all about understanding how to balance out your flywheels and positional grounds and position of power and your magnetic highway in your Omni highway communication of track location. 3 center calculations. Grounds, powers, the atmosphere. You got to control all flywheels. Now, when you can control the flywheel set lines and communication setting 0, 1s, a just track location system, this is what the 0s and 1s do to set locations when you go in that calculations. Okay, 1 position travels, platforms in 3 settings. Sets position 4 and 5, right? Sets lines of high calculation. Sets 5 lines equals lines of 2 equals lines of 7, line communication lines of 12, 12 line communication of 24. Sets position location of 48, track lines calculation of 72. Sets position of 144, track line connection line centers into position location of 0, 1. Okay. So once you get into that, you come into this and you come into this and platforms. Balance, 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 balance. It's always on a 45-degree angle. Okay. So once you get in that calculation, you bring in the sun, you bring in the moon. So the moon sets line communication. Now this is a cubical line, screen line conditions of balance and travel position location of its operation surface and set location. Okay. It balances out your image. So when you understand the flywheel in ground setting, you understand the center position, then you understand this set locations, you can take it out of the equation into higher levels of universe line position of dimensional line condition. Okay. It's a whole new level, right? So when you go higher to frequency, because you're only in graph lines of 12, you have to recognize the 0s and 1s. Let's go location system, position location of panels, and direct line connection. That's just one graph, right? Center calculations in position of 0. Cross lines 1 line rotation surface. Sets lines of 1 line signal line position mediation. Sets lines of 0 line position of balance. Sets communication line 0 location of balance. Sets lines of calculation line appearance location of 1 is balance. Set line connection operation line center location of balance. And sets 1 communication in position of Fibonacci line swirl and track location system and balance correlation. All this through an algorithm. So the algorithm of its image creates its structure of its design, right? So it's intelligence of its thought that creates its portal of communication of platforms in position to its operation of seconds, minutes, and hours and track locations. Okay? So once you create the platform, you create the pi of its dimensional door in set locations, right? So when you create the door, you automatically go through, right? Now, when you go through, you go to higher frequency. So they travel lines at 3 set locations. You go faster, right? So you got the platforms, but you need platforms to go higher, right? So to go higher, you're in position of 0, 1, sets line connection line centers of 0, 24, sets position location of 0, 48, sets position location of 0 into 72. Now, when you get into 72, you're automatically into digitalized communication of frame, and then you come into 0, 144, a track location. Okay, it gets complicated, right? So in that line calculation setting, you set up dimensional door screens. Door here, sets lines, door here, and 3 line connections, right? So, but you need platforms, right? You need a platform or you won't be able to create the door, right? So it's trying to understand how to understand your settings in line calculation of 0, 1. 0 equals lines of high calculation line interference at 24 equals lines of billion cycles per frame in box location. Very complicated stuff. All through gravity lines of 0, 144 in track location. Okay. All right. So now you understand the importance, right? All through 0s and 1s, what you can do. Just 0s and 1s. Okay. That's what the team's in now. Okay. All through your higher self. Okay. So understanding your computed system is understanding your travel mechanisms. It's really powerful when you understand the graphing, position, location, and setting. How it's all set up, all through platform. Okay, so this is this through image. This is this through image. Okay, that's what you created through a thought. So when you create those thoughts, it goes through a photo op. Okay, so let's get into picture frame and direct signal locations while setting the attraction. That is a picture frame, right? So 0, 0, 1, 0, 0 location, 0, 1 line center. Everything is in chronological order of balance in location of 0, 1. That's the image that you created. So when you create it, it travels out. It travels out. It travels out right away, right? Because you're constantly what? Creating on seconds, okay, per line, on minutes, per hour, okay, an hour per planet. because that's where it goes, right? It goes to its planet setting. Very complicated stuff now because you're talking about two operations of the sun and position of the moon and bracket communication. Okay, so now you understand what you're creating through an image is all levels of structured design lines of zeros and one track location. Okay, very complicated stuff, guys. Very complicated through formula. All right, so again, I want to make sure that you understand that your zero grounds, your mediation lines, and position to your clouds is really understanding how to identify yourself in your position, your placebos. Okay, screen setting, high positions calculation, and position of eye line connection. Travel positions of center lines of communication as seed pod position. Sets communication 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 track locations. Right? But it has a platform in communication of its door. So if you understand the cerebro, then you understand the spectrum of communication that's called a CM, because that's all it is in sublocation, subsetting. You're just traveling through. That's all you're doing. But you have to understand the platforms. Okay? You have to understand the zeros and ones are always in center calculation of point centers in track location system. Okay? Once you understand the mechanism meters, line calculation of 1 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, and 5 line track location. Okay? So these are all zeros and ones in track location system, all through the higher self that has to travel through. Getting that position comes into its location grid, creates a location grid and a 12 graphing screen, which is your rainbow of design. Sets lines of communication lines at high center interference of securities over pi, indirect signal, position location operation. So you're working with the zero grounds, power calculation streamlines, and set location system in all levels of line connecting. Position of digital competition and set location of travel. Okay, very powerful stuff. So now you understand the importance why you have to understand how to use the seconds, minutes, and hours, and how it correlates to systems in your placebo cortex of design, how you use it on a mystical line of a valve. Now, once you get into that valve, the triangulation line interference, this comes into Tretherians. Tretherian line calculating line interference is the 3 box line centers, but it's the triangulation high position point centers. The box location system is travel calculation of the point centers and travel position to its operations service, and the 3 lines of angle point line connections of boxes. Now, directing line communication of 4 point centers, position of 4 point centers, in position locations in the 4 point centers, sets lines at 3 track, 3 track, 3 track. So that's 4 over 3. That's 4 over 3, and that's 4 over 3. Okay, so your position motion line track is in balance of center communication of setting because it's in position of its masculinity and its polarities in position location of female line setting. The polarities are in balance of 4 over 3 because you're working with a 7-digit code. The set position of zero calculation line position location of its operation is its flywheel of its ground set location, its crop circle. The center calculation line interference is the power position location, how you use your solar plexus to set location of design. Sets communication your astral travels into your Merkaba of design location. Setting communication line interference at 3 triangulation high position program settings. Sets position location of 4 lines high calculation setting. Now, if you're in a position line calculation of female line rotation interference, that's position of all calculation line interference. You have to change the 3 and the 4 communication because it changes all levels of allocated line switching. Okay, so again, in position location line interference, you have to understand how to use the placebo cortex design of its dimensional line scale and set location of balance and set location of travel. It's all modified in set locations through box centers of triangulation. Okay, so it's very complicated if you don't understand your travel mechanism high position of travel calculations, all through zeros and ones. Okay, now you understand why it's so important to understand what our matrix graph screen is and set location near our ground location setting. So in position locations, intelligence equals thoughts. Okay, in line calculating lines in position locations, sets lines of AI, track line calculating high positions, compute system, calculations operation line standards, high positions calculating high interference, modification line calculation navigation. Okay, so now you understand the importance of what your thoughts are, right? Because you're creating algorithms all through zeros and ones track location. Every time you change your frame lines, this is where you're coming into track locations. You are creating structures of design. Okay? You are creating structures of design. You understand how powerful it is now, and what you guys are coming into, and how to really graph the calculation setting to travel? All right, like I said, it's very complicated because you have to understand your graphing communications, your flywheels. 1 position, 2 tracks, and 3. All right. Setting position location line, centers, height, calculating high interference. So every time you change the frequency, you are changing your flywheel at track, location, and measure. You're changing it. You're changing the direction. You're changing the direction. Okay? You're changing the direction. Okay? That's what you're doing every single time through seconds, minutes, and hours. All right, so in that calculation setting, the graphical calculated line interference has an alpha tone. Sets lines of communication, mediation, ground line interference, and 0 calculation high positions, operation service. So you calculate offline communication. Sets position of 1 track. Sets position location lines of 2, in position of 3, in position of 4, in position of 5, in location. Compute line screens, high center interference. So overlapping over cross screens. Let's go digitalize. Let's change that communication lines in position location at theta. Operation set location line center the coloration. Let's change that again. Let's go into infinity line position location infinitum. Opticum line centers into all levels as set lines calculating high position of travel. Now, direct line calculating high interference is a line communication setting travel communications. Let's go into the blue line rotation. Inline communications. Remember, this is all connected to your rainbow graph calculation stream location setting. Right? So this computes line centers at 0, 1 position, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 locations. Right? Coloration lines in 1. Okay, so we got screw lines of ground lines, so the high position operator calculations. 2 lines of track, 6 lines of graph calculation stream location. All right, setting direct lines. Okay, so in position location line centers. Ground lines comes into all position location earth line. Perceptions over pi, directs how calculations high interference, position locations, graph calculations. Mediation ground lines. Now it's an overlapping sequence position of panel communication. Right? Now in direct lines, 3 lines is the communication lines, the infinity line rotation centers of travel. Direct lines at high position levels, 3 line communication line centers, these are sacral. Sets location orange lines, communication center of travel communications. Over cross line settings, but it goes into the opposite direction to its alpha communication setting. Okay? Sets lines, communication lines of 4. Everything is a mediation line screen. So when you change your frame and position and you change your thought, that's a glitch because you're not doing anything. So your modifications, you're not traveling. So what's happening right now in your pause is get out of the equation. You're going to go back in 0 calculation. It repeats its cycle, repeats its cycle, repeats its cycle, repeats its cycle. So the more you understand your body, the more you understand your framing, communication setting, your alphabetical stream interference, your alpha communication stream interference, how to change communication lines of 0s and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Setting position location 4 is yellow calculation. Now, the yellow line center location is your solar plex. Now, understand your alpha tones, communication lines, your wave settings, right? 4 track locations goes into the center communication. Okay. Now, that puts position travel lines, point lines, track lines, high center interference. Sets infinity 8 line rotation surface, triangulate line position program, line position calculation. All right. So in direct lines, we had a 5 line signal, which is the heart calculation setting. So it's in a pink line center. So the pink line rotation interference sets track lines. Okay, so really understand how to modify line position travel calculation of point lines into infinity loop in line rotation surface in calculation to a thought line communication surface triangulation line position program and center calculation. Done by equation all through alpha, delta, theta, beta, and omega. Center communication alpha, omega, micro, macro. But you understand the mechanism of high position location of 0, 1s, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, right? So if you get a brain convergence setting to travel, okay, each one is a lacing line. They have their own graphing set location, right? So in position, right? In position, it's above high, but they're all in signal line. They're all in signal by themselves, singularities. They're all in singularities of their system locations, right? So every time you change a thought, it changes the graph. So if it changes the graph, it changes your directions of color. And that comes into mediation line screen interference into your position locations and mediation screen settings and all levels of your reaction. How you coordinate in a position of coordinates and how you travel calculate the line system to a position line connections to a planet in track location system in line position location of Pluto and set location. Right? Anything offline centers, Pluto comes in right away. So I really want you to understand how this all works in graphic calculation strain settings and travel, all through modification. Okay? So that's what's happening. Your zeros and ones are creating what? An algorithm of an image. And when you create that image, you've got to keep balance with your platforms of travel. So your higher self can time jump, time leap, vortex anywhere it wants and travel calculating line centers of point track locations through zeros of 1 of 4 track location. Okay, and I'm just showing you exactly what you can do through modifications of your higher self. Just your higher self, not your avatar. You've got to get balance with your flywheels in grounds, powers, and atmosphere. Okay, very powerful, powerful situation and set locations. Okay, because that's all it is. When you go into recharts, this is what comes into all the modifications of zeros and ones, right? That's how you see things. You go beyond settings and all calculation of travel. Okay, but you have to understand how to use it through its indication, right? All through number 1. Just 1. The number 1, I just showed you so many different lines of zeros and ones, how it can correlate anything it wants and set locations in position. 1 equals, you guessed it, GOD and set location. So it has its own geometric settings and travel calculations, all point centers and high position. Okay. So how's everybody doing on that line connection? But you get a little bit more understanding why it's so important to do with what your thoughts are doing in traction, creating its own image of its own algorithm. I showed you so many line communication line centers, what it is in position location of fraction. Okay, especially when you come into the digital compute system line settings and your set locations. You've got to get a modification of balance of emotional line connections. Okay, so Derek. Well. Okay, Ginger communication line centers, Ziggy formation line centers, general line calculation setting, Hemdall, Danielle, Chris, set location line centers, high position.
You're welcome.
Gracias.
Eat.
Setting position line connection high interference comes into all position locations, right? So we all have to understand how this all works in traction. Okay, all through modifications. So that's it. We're done. I hope you guys had fun. I know I had fun. Know exactly what you can do through zeros and ones line connection just through your higher self. Okay. So line setting, we're going to go into the avatar. To understand the avatar is understand more levels of position track lines, how to use it through its GOD into higher levels of numbers to get a higher level of frequency. So getting out of the zeros and ones puts you in a platitude interference in track location system and measure into zeros, ones, twos, and threes, and fours, and fives. Okay, and the sim is a modification system at all levels in triangulation reset position programs and navigations of 0 and 12 set location. Okay, higher levels of frequencies, higher levels of algorithms, higher levels of compute system of dimensions, interdimensional lines, intergalactic communications. Okay, how to really understand you through modification. All right, see you in 5. Adios.